You ready?
Ready? Hey guys, what up, y'all?
Yo. Sharice decided to go live on me as I was
It
venting
said go
about
live. It said Showtime Librarian. I really, really love you, and I appreciate the email that you sent. Please stop liking every single one of my stories. You missed. I posted that several times, but it's so many notifications, and I be blocking people. I will not block you. I really, really appreciate you and your enthusiasm, but just pick a couple of them. Just pick a couple of them to like. All love though, but I just wanted to tell you that.
Yeah, I hope you got to watch the rest of the show last week because I know you said you left early, but we did read your thing out and just want to shout you out as one of those people who are doing that work to make things accessible to people beyond paywalls and
Yes.
yeah.
There's so many people getting MLSs and
Yeah.
like love it. We absolutely will be tapping you for things, even to maybe create, like right now we don't have no resources. We posted 2 things, but like, to create things to be accessible, like
Yeah.
for the masses. 'Cause somebody was posting about that on social media, like I think it was Darius the poet. He had posted like so much Black radical stuff is in these archives that are inaccessible. And so
Yeah.
that's when I shouted out Freedom Archives. But it's and then I think maybe Musa mentioned there's also all this shit behind paywalls that people can't get
Yeah.
access to. So yeah, liberate the resources, bro.
Yes.
Liberate the resources. Yeah, what's up, y'all?
People.
Rouse pasta sauce. Is do you actually make pasta sauce? I see the pasta in there. Rouse pasta sauce.
Oh, because when you said that, it sounds like, what is Rouse pasta sauce? I see it now, though.
Yeah. Do you actually? Is that like a thing? Is it sauce for the revolution?
Speaking of which, because if we're gonna do a Black Radical brunch this summer, you might have to sauce it up.
I know. Yes. Exactly. We can support the movement. Wow, it'll take 50 years to get through all the slave archives.
I was trying to put that one up. I was trying to put the slave archives one up there, but I hit the. Why do I keep hitting the wrong one? Okay, y'all. I don't know why.
Why it's being weird. One of my friends was
There it goes. That's crazy.
Yeah, I use LibGen. I was always wondering when Anonymous or whomever would start leaking book PDFs. If you go to libgen.is, they have a whole bunch of them. But I be telling people, like, if you ever see anything that I've written access like anywhere, leak that shit. I do not care. Our royalties are ass anyway. And even if they were amazing, like whatever.
Yeah. No, I always tell my students that in class, I was like, I assign books, but I always make sure they're available either on LibGen or somewhere else. I was like, you should not have to buy these books, but I can't put it on the syllabus because technically we're not allowed to do that.
Right, exactly. And because my homie Alex was telling me that it's hard for like independent bookstores or like whatever their space is to get discounts from academic or like academic press so especially those, it's like you find, and even if I have galleys, I be sending people galleys and stuff. The galleys just aren't the final thing, but yeah, I don't care. I do not care. Liberating. In fact, I think I have a PDF of the Du Bois book. I do on my academia.edu. I found it somewhere and was like, bloop, because that thing, it's only out in hardback, so it's even more expensive. So
it's libgen.is. I'll put it in the chat.
Yep.
Oh yeah, and my dad is a pro at finding stuff. Like he ain't got nobody's degree, but I be like, okay, you find this for me, and like he will come back to me within an hour. Like
it's true. And I want to shout out PM Irving. PM Irving is doing this massive, like radical Black literature project. Basically, that's based on bringing things back into publication, putting things in publication by like Harry Haywood, Shirley Graham Du Bois. He's doing some stuff with W.E.B. Du Bois, some writings of W.E.B. Du Bois. Who is the other people? There's several people, and there's these different subcommittees. I'm on the Harry Haywood subcommittee, so we're working on getting first Black Bolshevik, but then a whole bunch of other stuff back into circulation for the first
so
time.
what is that process like? What do you have to do to do that?
So we have to find the permissions. We have to pick a press. So I think he has a relationship with a particular press that all of this stuff will be in a particular series, but permissions is the main thing. So I think that the Schomburg, because Haywood's papers are at the Schomburg, I think the Schomburg has the permission. So it was Gwendolyn Midlow Hall, I believe, but she passed away. So we have to see where the estate went. But that's the main thing if it's not in the public domain, if it's before, after like 1934 or something. And then you just find a publisher, and then, we have to scan it, do OCR scanning to make it typable Word documents, and then you got to check the main document against the OCR to make sure there are no mistakes. Then you send it to the press, and then of course the new introduction, probably some type of prologue from a prominent person, that type of thing. So but the permissions is the hardest thing to
I remember when I was an editorial intern at Duke Press, and doing permissions for new books is a freaking headache. So
yeah, because for example, if you're doing like an essay thing and you've published the thing elsewhere at a journal, like you have to go through this whole situation. So that's
why we got to get rid of intellectual property rights.
We got to get rid of intellectual property rights, especially because people be swagger jacking anyway.
All
right, y'all. So let's go ahead and get started. Austin's suspension got lifted, y'all. So thank you to everybody who called in, wrote in, sent prayers, vibes. His suspension has been lifted. I think that we're still organizing around getting the suspension of other comrades lifted, but yes, shout out to Austin. He deserves everything to be, to get restored, and his job and his degree and all that. So we're very, very happy about that.
Wait, so did they have graduation already?
I haven't seen MIT's. I know Harvard did. No, because remember, I think he said it's at the end of May.
Okay, because I was wondering if he was Harvard disallowed from walking or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's at the end of this month. It should maybe it was this past weekend or next weekend.
Okay.
Yeah. What else? Okay, so other life updates. So y'all, I finally made it to Freedom Archive. I have engaged their archive digitally for a long time, but I finally made it to the building in Berkeley. It's awesome. I met Claude, who was like the main archivist, I suppose. The big homie, the little homie Noah works there. Nathaniel, and also I think the other girl's name is Jennifer. I feel so bad for forgetting her name, but they're a tiny team, but they got so much papers there. Their BLA collection is probably and RNA collections are probably their largest collections. They got NAPO, bunch of Puerto Rican liberation stuff, a lot of stuff around political prisoners. They have a whole run of the Black Panther Party paper. They have a lot of Black Scholar, not the full run, but a lot of the physical copies, a lot of first editions of stuff. So it's awesome. They're open on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So if you're in Berkeley and you're doing research on like the 60s and 70s radicalism, hit them up, make sure to check them out. I'm trying to get them to, do a symposium for a fundraiser for people who've done research there. So get people like Gerald Horn, myself, Ori, other radical scholars to really talk about how they have used the archive or just radical scholarship in general to raise funds, because they don't take no Mellon money, no Ford money. They just, they want to keep things autonomous.
Checking it out.
So yeah, that was cool. All right, so on 5/31. I have a talk in LA at the Hood Library, which is the headquarters of the No Name Book Club. I think it's at 7 p.m. I'll be in conversation with the homie, the comrade, Michael Anderson. So if you are in the LA area and you didn't see my talk at Midnight Books or at the CSUs or at, where else did I go? Power Books, then pull up to the Hood Library. Even if you did see those, you can't get enough of Black Scare, Red Scare, pull up. Also, so I'm prepping for the second half of the year and quarter three. So, quarter three starts in June, January, February, March, April, May, June. So it starts in July. So this first half of the year has really been bullshitting, just trying to keep my child alive. And so for the second half of the year, I really want to get my routine shit together. I've been going to the gym for the past week or so, like consistently. So that's been good. It's a good way to kickstart. To finish Q2 strong, kick off the second half of the year strong. Yeah, I'm just trying to get my shit together. So that involves like journaling, meditating, exercising regularly, obviously reading and writing. Those are like the main things that I want to be doing consistently. And so building up those practices. The last thing I want to talk about is, y'all, I have officially entered my settle your quarrels era. This will take on a little bit more significance in a minute, but anybody who knows me knows that I can be a very contentious, very antagonistic person. But I have entered my settle your quarrels era. Up to and including, I have not been following the beef between Kendrick Lamar and Drake. It's like I am anti-beef. I am just I'm in my settle your quarrels era. I am not all over the place, Eric Buck.
No, okay, that wasn't about you emotionally. That was about your travels for your book. That's why.
Okay, I was about to say I'm in my settle my quarrels era. Eric, get my square. Not joking, but so what that means, so there's a few quarrels, like actual quarrels that I want to settle. It's going to be hard because I am a Taurus and I hold grudges, but it is very important to me to reach out to these people to at least extend the olive branch. And it also means just taking more care, taking a beat when it comes to criticism, when it comes to my own critique, to have an ethical form of polemic, etc. So I am in my settle your quarrels era. I invite us all here because there is so much going on in the world. The last thing we need to be doing is beefing with each other. So that is my update.
All right. So I don't have a whole lot of life updates. This weekend, a good friend of mine turned 40, and it was really, really nice because she invited, she just had a baby also. So her baby, actually, well, I shouldn't say just, because he will be one actually in about 2 weeks. So she had a baby last year. She turned 40. On the 25th, and we had a lot of mutual friends over and other folks, and it was really nice because we did like a round robin of like why we appreciated her, and it was really nice to hear people talk about like her role in our friendship circle. She's a psychologist by training, and so she has a good like settling energy between us, and it was nice to hear everybody kind of acknowledge that. So that was just making me think about, where I am in life and the things that I want. And so I'm kind of in an interesting place right now, in terms of, approaching 40. My dad's going to be 70. Like, I'm still trying to figure out where I want to be. So all those things are to come. I should probably do more meditating and journaling. I'm not always consistent with those things, but such as like, okay, so then the other things, yesterday, I think I mentioned it last week, but yesterday I actually did the interview with the 1919 magazine, which is or 1919 Mag, which is a group of like African diaspora young folks out of Toronto. And I believe that interview was actually, it was a 2-part interview. So the first part was like some kind of background information on Pan-Africanism, and the second half was like a myths about Pan-Africanism. But so the guy who interviewed me, his name's actually Muhammad Ali. But he was telling me, he also watches the show, and it's y'all, I don't think I will ever get used to people like being excited to meet me that don't know me. Like and it's not that he wasn't being weird about it at all, but just like, I don't know, that's an interesting feeling. And so we're talking about that on the show, but he was telling me that the 1919 mag was like them thinking about the kind of era of print magazines, and trying to do something to kind of bring that back. And so it's a project that they're just sort of launching. So follow them. Actually, when I get done talking, I'll drop their website in the chat just for people to check it out. And then the last thing that I have going on is that so as a product of going to African Liberation Day last week, I was spending time with my Uncle Bob, and he has been working with this woman. Her name is Andredina Cardoso, I believe. She's based in Portugal, but she is working on this Unbreakable Heritage Project, which is about addressing the history of genocide and slavery in African diasporic communities, in particular in the Lusophone world. And she has actually asked me to ask Northeastern, or consider being a Boston base for this project, particularly because there's such a large Cape Verdean or even just Lusophone African descended population here in the Boston area. And so that is something that I'm thinking about doing and trying to figure out how I can contribute to. So those are really my kind of life updates at the moment.
Woo, 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 woo. All right, y'all. So we got some comments to read, and then we have 2 longer emails to engage. So I'm going to start with this comment, which, remember, I'm in my settle your quarrels era. So this person, Manat, said, seems like CBS is always arguing with the ideas spewed from the worst of the worst. People who are definitely not in community with us or here listening. So I gotta say, there's really not a lot of nuance required to debate those ghosts. And she's almost like giving their ideologies a platform or speaking life into those perspectives by doing it so much. More study, less condescension, please. Now, I will say that I read this comment several days ago, so I have had time to work through the myriad responses I could give. But again, because there are not a lot of responses I can give that are not snarky or just very caustic, I'll just say I said what I said. And I am not Christina Ricci or Haley Joel Osment. I do not speak to dead people or Casper the Friendly Ghost. The things that I reference are comments that I've gotten either on social media, in my email, in DMs, in conversation with colleagues or other people, and or comments during Q&A that I've gotten during talks. And so I'm not shadow boxing. I don't make up critiques to have. And you can agree with them or not agree with them. And in terms of more study, less condescension, I'm just going to volley that right back at you, dear Manat. So thank you for sharing your perspective. Next.
Okay. So the next comment is from Lou, who I believe is here in the chat now. Said, great episode. These are really quick. So then there's one from One Love that says, y'all look beautiful. And then another one is Norma Dean Murphy? Love the ladies no matter what day. So happy you're back. So just shout outs to y'all. Appreciate y'all for showing up and showing us a little love.
Yeah. And then James Irvin had also sent an email. He said, Dr. CBS and Dr. Brown, I listened to you all and liked the show. I wanted to give both of you a big what's up. I recently read All About Love. It was my first Bell Hooks book a couple of weeks ago. She is cold, tight, and spitting words in the book. I am currently reading Communist Manifesto. It is a process, my learning in book picks. This book, as you all probably know, starts off slow. They got a lot of back and forth going on to get the ideas on paper. I'm going to thug it out and see what I get from them. Get from it. It is an audience out here. I'm an electrician maintenance worker that's a lifelong learner. I wanted to salute both of you. Well, thank you, James. Shout out to you. I love non-academics who tune in. I love my academics that tune in, but it's always great that just ordinary working folks who, of course, are a core part of like who we want to organize and who we want to be in community with. So shout out to you, James.
Yeah, my dad is an electrical worker. Well, he's retired, but electrical worker by trade. And he often talked about the struggles to maintain his commitments to political work, and reading really, and just trying to keep up with that. And he actually really revels in the fact that now that he is retired, he gets to do all the reading that he wanted to do when he was a electrical worker, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, coming home from work at 2, 3 in the afternoon, passing out tired, right? So definitely that. I was going to ask, so I know CBS, you were doing a little period where you were reading about love because you were thinking about something. And did you get through All About Love or no? Because I know you had picked it up at one point in time. Because I know you're not a fan.
I am not a Bell Hooks fan, but I'm settling my quarrels. But I'll talk about this more when we talk about the books that we read. Jen Nash is in the last chapter of her book. She talks about love, and so I'm slowly working through like love and ethics of care, that literature. So I haven't gotten to that though, but I'm gonna put it on my list, or it's on my list, but I'm gonna move it up just because James seemed to think it was
I
Did you
enjoyed
read it?
it. I did because it's like a trilogy, right? So it's all about love. Um, there's I forget what they all are called. To Leah picking on me for looking to my left. So I have a dual screen. So like my laptop is here and I have a monitor here, but I also have this little like reading stand to my left. So when I'm looking to my left, I'm either looking at my computer or looking at this reading stand. Just FYI. But yes, I have enjoyed those books, and even The Will to Change, which is about masculinity. But also, I feel like that's still in the vein of her love stuff. And then to Meltra's point, yes, I do know that that Layla in Arabic means night. I actually know what all of my names mean, and I have mentioned that quite a few times that I was named after Layla Khalid and Bilal Mugrabi. And I was also given a South African name, Zanelli. And all of my siblings and I have Sekou in our name after Sekou Touré. But I thank you for telling me that.
Hold on. So we already knew who made the comments, Keontae. I read their name and they're in the chat. As I said, thank you for sharing your perspective. I've said what I'm going to say on it. So as you were. You want to read the...
Yes, this long email. Okay. All right. So this is from Kwasi. Rusi, I guess is the last name. Dear Dr. Brown. Oh wait, no, that's the second one. Let me read the first one. Dear Dr. Brown and Dr. CBS, my name is Kwasi. I am a Black trans labor organizer who is a Pan-African communist. They put a what do you call it? An asterisk at communist. So if I don't know if you're in the chat, but I'd be interested to know why the asterisk whatever. I named this in hopes that it is understood that I am not approaching the questions I'm about to pose from the place of a non-organizer with endless things to complain about. I'm asking because I think the question is central to really building momentum for Black organizing efforts. There was a moment at about the 19-minute mark of episode 1.9, where Dr. CBS was talking about anti-blackness or anti-black racial oppression within movements, and Dr. Brown almost instinctively said, of course. I am wondering how to square such a quotidian inflection of anti-blackness with Dr. Brown's remarks around the 14-minute mark of episode 1.11 regarding primary contradictions, where Dr. Brown named her status as an African Black person as the primary contradiction. I don't mean this as a gotcha. Rather, I think that it is one of the fault points in the geological sense of many Black political organizing efforts. It is constantly shaking things up and becoming an impediment to Black organizing, especially of the international character, at some of the most critical junctures. I have in mind as a couple of examples, the CPUSA's abandonment of many initiatives that were critical to Black organizers and laborers in the South, as Robin Kelly records in Hammer and Hoe, and the dwindling funding as well as support for the ITU CNW, which led to a particular split between the international communist movement and the anti-colonial movement, including the internal colony in the US. On the other hand, I understand you both as considering anti-Blackness or anti-Black racial oppression as something requiring serious effort to address, but also feel that it comes off as something that just comes with the territory. I think a part of what gets lost in conversations nominally about Afro-pessimism is that Afro-pessimism is trying to work through this, of course, where many other spaces seem to leave it at of course. Two, I think the work is easily appropriated by people who would like to bandy it about as an absolution from doing anything, which I cannot agree with, is what Afro-pessimist analysts suggest. And I just fervently disagree with that, because I've literally heard Afro-pessimists say that it is not prescriptive. So for this point, I point to page 182 and page 235 of Red, Black, and White, where there is discussion of the immense coalitional possibility between Indigenous Black movements, especially around genocide, as well as how it might be achieved. I think it is one of the main points of attraction for many people who are not organizers. In the name of movement building, I think the underdevelopment or perhaps under-addressing of the matter leaves much room for bad takes on anti-Black oppression within our communities and movement spaces. If If mass movement building is an aim, then I think that a protracted conversation about dealing with anti-blackness might be key, because at this point, I'm not willing to bet that the masses of African people are willing to leave anti-blackness at of course. I wonder if you all wouldn't mind spending some time on one of your episodes talking about what it could mean to take anti-blackness in coalitions and non-black third world or global South communities seriously. I've long appreciated both of your work since even before Life Study Revolution, and would deeply appreciate hearing what you all have to say about what it means to take this contradiction seriously. I think it's especially poignant given the conversations you all have had about answering the questions of whether a group should or should not split from a broader organization, the decision of the AAWRU to stay within the AAPRP regarding the questions of gender politics that Dr. Brown has discussed a few times, as well as the conversation had with Onye about you all leaving the platform formerly known as BPM, which one might contrast to the long history since at least Padmore's Pan-Africanism or communism of divisions between global Black left formations and broader international communist formations, at least up through the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union. I apologize that this email has drawn on, but I want to make my position, reference points, and make the sense of stakes clear. Thank you for your consideration and all of your contributions to struggle. I look to continue. So do you want to read this? Go ahead and read the second one, because it's just a continuation of the first.
No, you can address the anti-blackness part because it's a little bit different.
So I don't. I have not gotten a chance to go back to the actual conversations that we had to know exactly what you're referencing. And I don't know, CBS, if you want to point that out more. But okay, so again, the issue that I think I don't know that my of course was as dismissive as it was received. I don't know that was the nature of the conversation, at least not my intention. Because for me as a Pan-Africanist, my Africanness is at the center of that. But what I will say is that what I think happens a lot of times in spaces is that we've talked about this in terms of identity politics. There is a way that things get reduced and certain types of politics get lost. And I do think it's important to understand the ways that our Blackness and our oppression on the basis of our Blackness is connected to these sort of these larger structures like like capitalism, like neoliberalism, like imperialism. And so for me, again, I would have to know exactly what I was referring to when I said, of course, to directly be able to answer that question. But in terms of, what did you say you wanted to I wonder if you mind spending time on episodes talking about anti-blackness and coalitions and non-third world communities. So the thing about, I think is it Kwame Ture? He has a really interesting piece on coalitions. And the thing about coalitions, which is interesting, is that you cannot actually enter into coalitions with folks who don't actually see you as equal. So like one of the examples that I always give is that my ex used to work for the NAACP. And one of the terms of agreement that the NAACP has when they enter into coalitions with folks is that they always must be in charge of the coalition. And to me, that's not a coalition, because if someone's in charge of the coalition, that's not a coalition. That is somebody leading the charge and everybody else coming behind to follow. But the purpose of coalitions is so that organizations that have their own character, their own preoccupations, their own primary contradictions can come together to work on issue-based things, right? And so I think that's the nature of coalitional politics, is that you come together on issue-based items, right? Because if it weren't just issue-based, then you would actually be able to form organizations where you are working together. So for that reason, the primary place where I put my energy is in an African organization, which is the All African People's Revolutionary Party. However, I do recognize the interconnectedness of these struggles. And what I will often say is that I don't allow other people's ignorance or lack of understanding of the nature of our shared oppression to dictate how I behave and how I engage. And so if I am committed to a world without these forms of oppression, then I still am doing that work with Palestinians who do not identify as Black and American indigenous people who do not identify as Black. And if it comes to a point where
Black people who don't identify as Black or African.
Yes. And if it comes to a point where that anti-Blackness becomes recognizable, there has never been a point where I don't point that out. And it will, in some instances, result in me stepping away from the coalitional politics, but it doesn't change my commitment to that particular issue. So I don't know if that sufficiently addresses that, but that's the response that I have.
I mean, the other thing too, to me, I always say, like, we have to believe our own analysis. And so if we understand that anti-Black racial oppression, along with white supremacy, along with sexism, along with all of these other, transphobia, et cetera, if we believe our own analysis, then we have to understand that those things are going to be present until we actively work against them. So the first, I think, level is pointing it out, and then organizing to rid our own selves, as well as our comrades or coalitional partners, of those pretenses. But if it is that we, anytime somebody says or does something that is, ensconced in one of these isms, we just break ties altogether. There's no way to build a mass base, right? I think that part of solidarity is being able to build enough trust to be able to have these types of conversations. And so the question about anti-Black racial oppression is important, but again, back to the primary contradiction conversation, understanding, and then also, like, the primary contradiction conversation points to what the sort of foundational issue is, that many of these things emanate from imperialism, from exploitation, right? From capitalist exploitation and the racial logics that are embedded therein. And so I think that we just keep on doing that work. And I think, if I'm understanding what that moment was, Layla's, of course, it was just simply to say, yes, yes, it's present, right? Yes, it's something that we need to address. So what is this?
Is it anti-Blackness or internal white supremacy? When the white supremacy is addressed, the anti-Blackness is typically not present, since it's not naturally occurring but cultivated. I mean, anti-Blackness is a byproduct of white supremacy. So
yeah, so, like, anti-Blackness is a species of white supremacy. Mm-hmm. So I think it's again, when we talk about refining our analysis or being specific, that's when we name things like, it's like being precise about patriarchy versus sexism versus misogyny, all linked and related, but being clear about what exactly we're struggling against in that moment, I think, is important. And it is certainly part of white supremacy, but not reducible to it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next email. It says, Dear Drs. Brown and Dr. CBS, my other email was really drawing on, and I didn't want to extend the block of text any further than I already had, but I really owe you all your flowers and wish to offer them. I came up in what I thought was Black student organizing, which was nominally diasporic between 2015 and 2019, and entered into labor organizing when I graduated and got a union job not long after. From my time as a first year, we sought help from our Black professors and the guidance of upper class Black students as we organized. More often than not, the upper class organizers gave odd mumbo jumbo answers that led us to endlessly marching in circles. And the Black professors would offer us false histories about student organizing to absolve why they only ever had, quote, you all lead and we'll support you, end quote, as their political advice. Two, the grad students were fighting for union recognition under the UAW at the time and made contemporary unions sound like a worker's respite. If it weren't for you two, I don't know if I'd be able to place how wickedly I've been betrayed by these quote unquote organizers and professors. I was truly led astray. Dr. Brown, you were one of the first introductions, certainly my foremost, to the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Dr. CBS, you were one of my first introductions, certainly my foremost, to Black left politics, as well as intellectual and structural anti-radicalism in labor unions and beyond. At a time when I was trying to figure out why our campus organizing hadn't seemed to go anywhere, and at a time when I was being called a slave, wow, by union officials who also seemed to want nothing to do with labor organizing and certainly not communism, I don't think I could have found any better people to learn from, even if from afar. Learning from you all here and there on the Remix Morning Show and LDI, as well as other recorded talks, such as the one with Monthly Review. Shout out to Conscientism. And now LSR has really helped to keep me in the struggle and expand my study. I continue to share the lessons I've learned from you both with all those who are willing to have discussions about what infusing a radical Pan-Africanism, a Rodneyist politic, and the labor movement could look like. At present, I'm trying to determine what trajectory to take and am weighing the pros and cons of graduate study as part of my contributions to the movement. Two, I've had trouble with making headway with organizations outside of my union because my work schedule is 60 plus hours per week. Yet and still, I try to research and study with others whenever I can still a moment. Inspired surely by both of you, I've just returned from doing research in the papers of Evelyn and Matt Crawford, as well as Walter Rodney. All this said, I write to both of you as the likes of Franklin Harvey, Tim Hector, Robert Hill, Alfie Roberts, and others in Canada wrote to CLR James way back when, hoping I can make your acquaintance to discuss some of these matters more at length. And then some invitations to meet. Either way, I remain grateful beyond what I can express with words and hope that one day the struggle brings me across your paths. So that was a kind email. And yeah, shout out to, did we say the name?
Oh, I did. Kwasi.
Yeah. Shout out Kwasi. And yes, we absolutely can meet up. Let's make that happen. Okay, so we are still waiting for our esteemed guest, Musa. We sent the link, right?
You did, I believe.
Okay.
But also just to this point, right? That particular point that this person made about, as a student organizer, the kind of defeatist logic of being told by faculty members that the students are the real ones that have power. So on the one hand, as a student, I understand how that feels coming from faculty, but there's also actually a lot of truth in that, right? Because the student population is really the population that we serve, and they're quite transient, right? So they come and go, and they do, like, just as we're seeing with all the stuff with Palestine, right? The student population actually does have more power in a real sense than the professors. Now, I think sometimes people are at a loss. Like, I mean, this is something I struggle with in my classroom, because on the one hand, I want to like be realistic with my students. And like, so there are experiences that I've had that make me jaded towards particular forms of mobilization. I won't say organization, but mobilizations. But I also remember that, like, when I got arrested for Moral Mondays, I think that was like 2012, 2013. And I remember my dad was like not super impressed about it, but he also said that, like, this is your experience to have, and I think it's important for you to have it. And so I think as faculty members, there often is like this kind of struggle or this kind of tug of war between how much of our own kind of personal cynicism do we transfer to our students based on the experiences that we have and what we know, and how much do we actually push and promote the kind of, and when I say this, I don't say this dismissively, but what youthful ignorance allows you to undertake, right? And so there's some things that, like, the more kind of things you know about things, they can make you more conservative in the way that you move. And I think there's something about not necessarily knowing those immediate consequences as a young person that allows younger people to be freer to do those things. And so I think that that's part of that tension and struggle for faculty members on campuses, and because they really coming down on us too. And, now that doesn't change, how I push my students to engage. But I do think that that's something to consider with that.
I think the other thing too is that there's so many different ideologies and levels of commitment in a department. And I think that what we need to do as faculty within our departments or whatever the unit is to basically stay ready so we don't have to get ready. Because what often happens is when students call on us, then we have to have our meeting. Then we noodle over putting out this statement and how we want to show solidarity and blah, 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 blah. And what ends up happening, and the reason why they're able to target people, is because then it's one or two individual professors who end up stepping up and doing the majority of that advocacy, while everybody else is not doing that. And so I think that in a general sense, faculty can be more organized, and not just through like the AAUP channel, but more organized in a general sense, so that when students are mobilizing, which tends to happen cyclically, right, around all sorts of things, that we can know what type of support we're willing to offer, and we can really just mobilize that support from the outset. So yeah. So Musa is here. Hey, Musa.
Hey.
What's going on?
Nothing. I really appreciate that Ready, Set, Go that you gave me,
Oh, yeah.
I thought she was going to say your name and do the intro before she pulled you on.
Absolutely not. Here you are, looking great. Okay, so we are going to do an interview with Musa about the artist as revolutionary, about the role of culture work, and Musa specifically as a culture worker in movement and in organizing. And so we're very, very lucky to have them here. So Musa is a cultural worker, journalist, and organizer with the Black Alliance for Peace (ATL). They are the international youth representative for Cuba's Red Barrial Afrodescendiente, a volunteer with the Walter Rodney Foundation, and host of the Groundings podcast. So welcome, Musa.
Thank you. And I also forgot to add to that bio, I'm an editor at Hood Communist. Of course, can't forget,
Cannot. So doing a little bit of everything. So let's just go ahead and start with just a very broad question. What are some of the current modes of organizing and struggles in which you're currently engaged? And how does your cultural production fit into this?
Absolutely. And let me just say, it's an honor to be on here talking with you two really brilliant sisters. I listen, y'all chose a really bad timing for it to be live. So I watch the replay, every week. And Sharice, you're my big sis. I say my big little sis. But I be coming to you with all kinds of questions all the time, and you always give me a very quick and thorough response back, and I always appreciate that. So I just wanted to start off saying I appreciate you two so much for this space and for how many people are, I know, learning and growing from this space. And so, yeah, I think right now, I'm involved in
Wait,
a few
Moose, did you
different.
know I'm a Ghostbuster too? On this land. Okay, that was my last thing to say.
And also because I'm always saying this in the comments, but now I can say it again. Layla, I want the makeup tutorial. Like, I don't know why this is a tee hee hee kind of thing. I'm like, no, like.
Well, during the Black Radical brunch, you could whip it.
We'll make up to
get ready with me. Mm-hmm.
That's funny. That's funny. So right now I'm involved in a few different struggles and organizations, but my home right now is obviously BAP Atlanta, Black Alliance for Peace, Atlanta Citywide Alliance. And we're really digging our heels into the campaign to stop GILI, the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange Program that trains pigs from Georgia and across the U.S. with pigs who are currently committing genocide against Palestinians, right? As well as the Stop Cop City. The movement to Stop Cop City has now been nationalized, and people are seeing that as cop cities are spreading, and there's over 69 cop cities proposed now. So has resistance spread as well, right? So dialectically alongside the spreading of this cop city militarization strategy, there's also resistance spreading at the same time, and a huge cultural element to that resistance. And then I would say the heart of where my work is at right now, aside from my home in Atlanta, is in Cuba, and trying to end this criminal, illegal, cruel, exploitative, imperialist economic blockade that has been placed on the island by the U.S. imperialists for over 65 years now, give or take. And so that's where I'm at right now. Those are my North Stars, if you will. Every organizer tends to have a little, I don't know, a handful or collection of issues and items that that's like where a lot of your time goes. And that's it for me. What's up, Tunde? I see brother Tunde in the chat. Dusty ass sanctions, right? And so, a lot of the cultural work that I've done for especially the past 2 to 3 years has been directly related to those different struggles. With BAP Atlanta, we have made 7, I think, zines in the last 8 months or so. We've made Stop Cop City zines. We've also been making posters and trying to really create like a kind of visual just culture around our struggle. Because one of the things that our enemies try to do is to separate and divide and conquer. And they want artists to be separated and the artists and cultural workers to be in one camp over here. And then for the organizers and radicals to be over here. And that helps obscure what we do. It helps obscure organizing. It helps make us, as Asada Shakur said, monsters within our own community, right? And culture and art has a way of breaking through that imperialist isolation. And yeah, I'll leave it there because it's kind of hard to answer such a broad question, but I'd be a little mix and everything. Oh, and then of course, Hood Communist. Like, I think I've only been an editor at Hood Communist for I'm sure Erica is in the chat in the ether somewhere and will correct me, but I think a little under a year. Um, and getting to work with African writers from all around the world, some who it's their very first time they've ever published anything is on our blog, some where it's like talented academics and scholars and journalists who are submitting work to us, and all of us with this sort of revolutionary lens towards what we're writing. That work is really profound, and it continues to grow. And Hood Communist is young, relatively, and it's still growing, right? And so those are the things that have really been holding me down lately.
Thank you for sharing that. It's funny because actually that picture that's in my background there is from Cuba, from one of my trips to Cuba.
Nice.
So as we got ready to have this conversation with you, you shared a few pieces with us. And one of them was a 2018 piece that you penned in Medium titled Culture Worker, Not a Creative. In which you discuss your journey from referring to yourself as a creative to a culture worker. So I wanted you to, maybe for us and for the audience, to talk about the distinction you make between the two and why the latter is more representative of where you are now.
Yeah, and it's so funny because I shared that piece maybe a week or two ago online, and people are like, I that's in my syllabus for my class and stuff. And when I go back and reread that, I'm like, ew, what was I, going back and reading your own writing, especially when it's things you're passionate about, it's torturous sometimes. But the idea at the time when I published it was that we had this term creative. It almost came overnight, right? Like suddenly the word artist was no longer satisfactory. The word musician was no longer satisfactory. Cultural workers, as if this term had never existed before, and all of our revolutionary icons were not calling themselves cultural workers. And suddenly you had people like Chance the Rapper calling themselves creatives. And you have this kind of misleadership class really started calling themselves creatives, and this starts catching on. And then you have podcasts where they're like, oh, we're interviewing creatives, and academics calling themselves creatives. And so this term took a life of itself, of its own, in around 2017, 2018. And it, I often say, like, as a writer and journalist, you often have to take an L. You have to take a lot of L's, actually. And I never really actually called myself a creative, to be honest. I just took the L and was like, all right. People called me a creative for a long time. And then you start to sort of just go along with it, right? And you're like, all right, it's a panel with Black creatives. Sure, I'm on the panel, whatever. You know what I'm saying? And so you start to kind of go along with these terms before you really investigate the sort of ideological and political consequences and context they could have. And I remember like rereading a lot of Mao, specifically Chinese revolutionary Mao, and he spoke at several conferences and gatherings of artists and cultural workers in China during their revolutionary period. And he spoke a lot about, one, culture as like a weapon in our army, and there's one in particular from October 30th, 1944. And if people see me looking this way, just like Layla just said, I have a screen on, that side. But Mao is sort of talking, and he's putting forth this idea that we have to have a united front in cultural work. And he says, in our work, the war comes first, then production, then cultural work. An army without culture is a dull-witted army, and a dull-witted army cannot defeat the enemy. And I just found that really profound at the time when I wrote that piece, because here you have a sophisticated military general who, if you read his writing, similar to Fanon, some people think of him as like a stenographer of violence, right? Like that's all he cares about is violence. And this is so not true, but he spends a lot of time talking to cultural workers, a lot of time lecturing cultural workers, engaging them within his like the larger Chinese revolutionary sphere. So then I was like, okay, well, what else, like elsewhere, what else are people saying about culture work? And I came across Cabral, and Cabral describes culture as a site of struggle, right? He speaks specifically in the context of colonialism and imperialism, and he's essentially saying, uh, the return to the source idea of culture is dialectical. There's a material basis for our culture. And so under colonialism, our culture is largely impacted and influenced by colonialism. So for us to move forward, we must develop and reclaim the positive aspects of our culture and rid ourselves, right, of the colonial culture. And so all of that is to say, culture is so much more than just being creative, quote unquote. And what that does is it assumes that there is a certain class of people whose labor is creative labor and that we don't engage in creativity anywhere else, right? Like garbage men. I used to work in construction in the summers down here in Georgia, right? There's hella creativity that goes into that. Um, so it's this idea that we need to push back against assuming culture and being creative, quote unquote, are only for some small select group of people, and instead see culture as Walter Rodney puts it, culture is a total way of life, right? It is how we greet our newborns and say goodbye to the dead. It's how we treat our elderly and our children. Um, Culture is like a set of practices and values and ethics, and what comes out of painting and drawing and performances and music and all this, those are cultural products, right? Those are products of a culture. That is not in and of itself culture. You being creative, quote unquote, or a creative has nothing to do actually with culture in general. And that's why we can have so many people who are calling themselves creative, and then they go and maybe they're doing like a pro Cop City mural with Mayor Dickens, or they're creative and they're doing campaigns with Starbucks and Levi's, And so I think, just to sum it up, one, it was less about the actual term creative. It was, but it wasn't. And it was really just about defining what culture actually is for people and what it is not. And we, as cultural workers, people whose actual labor and sort of mode of survival under capitalism is connected to cultural production, we have language to describe that. That's what a cultural worker is. Creative is a new creative term. And so I'll stop there. I mean, there's a quick overview, but yeah, just trying to like dispel some really propagandistic, mythologies.
I think that creator goes alongside content, like the rise of content as a thing, right? Not art, not anything functional, but just content. Like film yourself doing random bullshit, that's content, right? And so I wonder if the turn to creator has to do with content creator and how content just became the method by which people circulated bullshit just for views or revenue or whatever.
Absolutely. And something you actually, Charisse, you kind of snatched me a little bit, but you helped me understand. I had an older writing about something that I called the representation economy. And you were
Mm-hmm.
like, why are you calling it the economy? Don't you mean industry? And I was like, damn, read me. But, you know, I think people confuse industry with culture, right? The idea that there is an industry for individuals who have a cultural production or cultural practice. There's an industry in which you can profit from. And um, there's a lot of different ways individuals can profit from and or exploit that industry. And I think Two Black, with his laundering black rage model, actually is really a brilliant way of looking at it and helps us understand, for example, in the wake of the George Floyd uprisings, when all of these millions of dollars were suddenly available and flowing allegedly, to black this and most of it to black businesses and entrepreneurs, or right back to the same corporations.
Mm.
Um, a lot of so-called black creatives, quote unquote, were given a lot of money. A lot of black content creators, right, and quote unquote influencers, were given a lot of money. What was the money used for? Question mark, question mark, question mark. But what it did was it created a class of individuals who felt that by merit of being a so-called quote unquote black creator and creative, that they were then deserving of funds and resources and support, and that it was a form of reparations or progress or liberatory that so-called black creatives, quote unquote, were essentially being validated and affirmed by corporations. And so I'm just using that as a larger example to show we don't value art under capitalism unless it is filtered through capitalist corporations, capitalist expectations of art, right? Like we've created terms to devalue artists popularly, like SoundCloud rapper, right? Like the whole first seasons of the Grounding podcast was on SoundCloud. I'm a SoundCloud rapper. So like, you know, people use these terms as pejorative. Um, it's a pejorative to not have $1 million budget on a music video. And we're like, oh, that's not a real music video because they didn't have, you know, jet skis and a helicopter and drone shots, right? And so capitalism has redefined what we think that we know about culture. Um, and then of course there's like the neoliberal turn towards like really austerity measures and sort of neoliberal capitalism that tells individuals essentially that the best way to progress forward both individually and collectively is through individual engagement in the market, right? So uh and I think Lester Spence is a really great individual to help us break down how neoliberal capitalism impacts the Black community. And so that is really how we get to this point where, well, and I also want to back up to 1 second because I realize you meet people at different points, you know, in their life. And I think when me and you met a few years ago, Sharice, through the Walter Rodney Foundation, I had already been an artist, quote unquote, you know, for several years. I've done art shows, solo exhibits, published poems, et cetera, et cetera. And I was kind of at a point where I was like tired of all of that by the time you met me. And I'm really re-emerging even as an artist. And it's because, and particularly here in Atlanta, if you are not trying to go through a very corporate capitalist route, like, you know, if I'm not trying to tell the tragic mulatto story that they want to play on TV, and I'm not talking about, you know, the difficulties of navigating masculinized gendered spaces as ontologically, like there is a certain kind of tract that we are told is pretty much the only legitimate way for us to express ourselves culturally, artistically. And I don't sing the biracial blues. I don't do that. Um, that whole game, you know. And so I say all that just to say, like, there's really a capitalist tract for those of us, particularly I'm talking about Black folks, for those of us who want to be artists, want to be cultural workers, but we don't know how to make a living from it unless we're engaging with this capitalist system because we've been taught that that is the only valid form of expression, right? And so yeah, like I'm not a content. Someone called me a content creator recently, and I was like, don't. I said something haram actually, but you know, I find it almost offensive how divorced that term is from labor, from culture. To be a content creator is almost the most politically neutral term thing someone could be. Same thing with influencer, right? Like these are relatively new created positions. And I think sometimes people forget like we can contest these categories. We can contest these job positions, you know? Like I would love a world where influencer no longer exists and maybe half of those influencers could join organizations and become cultural workers, right? um but
It's funny. That's how my partner feels about spoken word artist as opposed to poet. Like that's something that's cast only on Black poets to undermine that they are poets, right? But that's let me just get on to the next question that kind of relates to this, right? How do you distinguish between creating art as a culture worker that's meant to sort of raise consciousness into forward aspects of the movement versus that which is created by the entertainment class that's meant to distract, mollify, and mystify?
Well, this is like, you know, um hearing influencer. Yeah, this is the big kind of question that has even dated back to, if you read all the way, Langston Hughes. um he wrote this piece, The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, in 1926, right? And he's grappling with kind of the same question. um and this isn't necessarily like a new question, and I think that one of the moments in history that had it right to an extent in terms of finding the balance was the Black arts movement. But I think people deeply, deeply, deeply misunderstand the Black arts movement. It was not just random artists coalescing and doing things, right? Like, they were not in a signal chat, strangers deciding to form an art collective. They were all seriously engaged in political organization, all of them, for the most part. Let me not say all, because I'm sure someone will come up in the comments, not such and such, right? But for the most part, they were deeply engaged in political organization, and they understood that the art, the work itself, is not the art. The art has to be a result of and a product of the work. And so this is something that there's an exchange that took place during a delegation to Cuba a few years ago, where one of the people from the US asked some revolutionaries who we were talking to, who fought in Angola and fought in Cuba's Revolutionary War. And they were like, what was the role of artists during the revolution? And, it's like a US young person. And these older people were like, the older, revolutionaries, they were like, well, my dear, like, I feel like they probably just had to put down the paintbrush and pick up a gun. Like, and, you know, that's a very like straightforward, literal answer. But what he was later elaborated, he's like, a lot of times people in the West think that the art itself is what makes someone revolutionary. And it's like everything around it that's so much more important, right? Um, so there's that. The art itself is not the work. Like, you're not about to make a revolutionary rap song that drives the people to the streets. That's not going to happen. But you might be a part of an organization that does have a mass base within which you can then spread your music and your message, and you can incorporate that cultural element into that organization, right? And so I think that paradigm shift from art as a collective practice that we're doing within political organization towards this very individualist thing, especially when we think about like poetry, for example. uh I I have a podcast, and I write poetry, and I don't read a lot of poetry, and I don't like podcasts, right? The re the reason is that I even engage in these things is because I understand that this is where the masses are listening. Like, I created groundings because I'm like, all right, well, the kind of conversations I'm having on the phone with someone like Charisse, someone like Layla, et cetera, et cetera, I think people would benefit from hearing this. People are telling me everyone's listening to podcasts nowadays. So let me, settle my quarrels with podcasting and make a podcast. Like, cultural work is not always about, fun, sexy. I'm at like an art gallery. It's like, you got to do the shit that advances your objectives. Um, and I forgot the second part of the question, but I think I've been talking enough, so I'm gonna just stop there.
I think you got at the gist of it.
Okay, so I can't, I feel like you were in the chat the day we were talking about when I finished Muha Benjamin's Imagination, but I was going to ask you a question about imagination and cultural work. Did I just see you go like, like that? So anyway, I said we had a kind of rich discussion about it, and there were like some critiques about how imagination is being deployed, and the notions of like sort of dreaming and creating other worlds. But I wanted to hear from you as a culture worker. How do you conceptualize the importance of imagination for our collective liberation?
Yeah. I'm not familiar with the book you're referring to. Let me say that. I do remember you briefly speaking about it on an episode. So I just want to state that at the gate. I think that if I could block in real life certain words, imagination would be towards the top of the list. At least for maybe people like over 15 years old. But I think there's a very real way that because we, like I said, we do not have like a base understanding of culture, a definition of culture and imagination. These things do not come out of thin air. They emanate from a material basis, right? People listening can Google, base superstructure and then hit the images button, and there's a diagram that'll explain that to you. But I think that imagination itself cannot be this like abstract, secluded, isolated thing that only a handful of individuals can tap into. Um, I think imagination is very practical, right? Like my one of my best friends is a nurse and a doctor in the ER. He has to use his imagination every single day because someone comes to you with an issue. There could be a lot of different things that's wrong with that person. I work in communications in my day job. I have to use a lot of imagination. My part-time job, I work at the gym as a personal trainer, right? And so a lot of imagination goes into thinking about people's goals and the objectives and why they're coming to the gym. And so I tend to think nearly any impulse towards individualism is itself colonial and capitalist. And I think that it's no surprise that we're taught imagination is this very individualist experience. It's this thing. Um, the other aspect of think or the main consequence and reason why I'm so adamant about the idea that art and culture and imagination are not some secluded thing that a few people can do is because I dropped out of art school, but before I dropped out, I had to take drawing 1 and drawing 2. It was required. And there were individuals in the classroom who could not paint or draw a stick figure. Literally. Like there were individuals who were like, I am a photographer. I am only taking drawing because it is a required course. I can't draw a smiley face. But by the end of the class, with dedication, with patience, with training and instruction and an actual pedagogy approach that was wonderful, all of these individuals by the end are drawing the most beautiful things possible. It's not because they were just born natural drawers, they were placed in an environment that nurtured that. And so I think similarly, imagination, if it's in an environment, um, I think that, imagination, any environment can foster imagination. And I think imagination can be very practical in that, in its application. Yeah. And the last half point I'll make is that there is a very real way that, no shade, academics and cultural workers, but I'll really just more so say artists, um, use terms like imagination and the general vagueness around it for a lot of people as a way to kind of evade or elide actual rigor, like actual. There's a lot of talk about the Black radical imagination and a lot less about like, the Black Liberation Army, for example. So there is a very real way that like we kind of need to reclaim what it means to be imaginative, to be creative, to think about the imagination.
And I will just say that based on my reading of that particular book, Ruha shares that understanding of imagination. But the other thing, so are we doing a like a workout with Musa? Is that what, are we gonna do that? We're gonna work out and read.
Yeah, so a makeup tutorial for a workout session.
I love that. Yeah, yeah.
Not too many lunges though. I can't stand lunges.
Oh yeah, I got you.
I cannot stand lunges, but you know. Okay. So switching gears just a little bit, we got to talk about the moolah, right? Given that we are socialist, anti-capitalist, economic democracy, depending on what level of abstraction you want to work at, how do you balance being remunerated fairly for your labor? Because we literally have to make a living, right? And the pay me for my labor industrial complex that emanates from turning all of your talents and skills into commodities. And so here I'm referencing largely like it's a lot on Instagram, right? Where people make these infographics and it's like, did you learn something? Here's my Cash App, right? And so how do you balance making the contribution for like movement for struggle versus also needing to live?
Yeah, I think my first answer is unsatisfactory, perhaps for the anarchists in the room, but by being in an organization is the first step. Um, I think my artistic and cultural labor is the most valued, or it's often, not only, but is often the most valued from within movement spaces. Um, a lot of the commissions and the checks I've made through art have literally been through organizations. Hey, can you design this? Can you do that? Right. So I just think it's really even hard to have this conversation with people who are not in organizations, but who want to contribute specifically as a cultural worker. Because it's not that you can't, but it's just like the limitations only multiply the less that you're in some kind of collective. Um, but beyond that, this was like the OG thing that got me and Erica way back in the day. Ricky Ryan on Twitter, just laced up from the liberal, Twitter feminists. This was like the first domino before the whole thing fell. No, I'm just joking. I think that there are overcorrections, right? Intentionally and unintentionally, there are overcorrections. And I think that there is a militancy sometimes geared or targeted towards the wrong target. And I think there is a militancy and energy directed towards horizontally towards individuals rather than structures, policy, institutions, and capital. And so that is, I think, where a lot of that stems from. I think people are not stupid. People see the conversations around genuine, radical politics, racial justice, liberation, and there is a way that you can just kind of poke around the edges and exploit some of the language, for example, for your own gains. And I think that's where a lot of that comes from as well. So I think on one hand, there's an overcorrection taking place where artists we have been historically and currently denied full value for our work. Our labor has been devalued. Even among the left, some of the most voracious debates, decades ago in orthodox Marxist circles was like, what do we do with the artisans? And, um, our devaluing, despite needing a cultural element of labor at almost every industry, our labor is deeply undervalued. And then now with AI, I don't know. I mean, that in and of itself, it's like, why go to and pay an artist when you can just not pay them, but use, machinery that was trained on that artist's work. Um,
It's gonna
and
be like
so,
people who want to keep their vinyl. He's like, no, I actually want actual brush strokes. It's supposed to.
yeah, it's, it's true. I mean, I was just, a friend of mine is helping me build like an analog, um, we don't have a word, analog archive, but I'm like, I want to be able to have VHS, DVD, CD, all these things in physical because there's actually a lot of labor that goes into that. But for me, I have navigated it by there was a Toni Morrison interview that I heard a long time ago, I think maybe 2015, that my friend Miles E. Johnson shared with me. And we talked about it. And we were basically just like, Toni Morrison didn't even publish her first book until she was, I don't remember the age, but was in, I think, her 40s, late 30s or 40s, if I'm not mistaken. But she was an
It was
editor. Yeah. But she was an editor for years. Like, she had a job, you know what I mean? Like, she had a 9 to 5. She edited dozens of books before she ever published her first book. And she was a notable editor. She was a wonderful editor. And so she talked about how she was like, my writing is for a purpose. My writing is one thing, but I also have my 9 to 5. And I'll be honest, for me, that I heard that at like, I had to have been like 21-ish years old. And I was like, yeah, I think let me go get a job. But and so I think it goes back to this idea of like the work itself is not necessarily the cultural production, it's what goes into that. Um yeah, and I think that our technology is currently posing new questions for cultural workers and artists and collectives and organizations on how we work with and deal with cultural workers. And I think some of those new questions around AI and things like that, quite frankly, are irresolvable. You know, they're like irresolvable contradictions. Um,
Aporia. That's an irresolvable contradiction.
thank you, sis. I needed that.
no, but I do think there is something about monetizing work that you're doing for different kinds of reasons that actually takes the joy, the radicalness, the revolutionary nature out of it. I mean, I'll never forget there was an interview that Fonte of Little Brother did where it's even in one of the songs where he talks about like having to make a living off of music takes the joy out of making music. And I think that's true for me. Like I don't, I'm not a I don't consider myself a writer. I'm an academic, I'm a teacher who has to write. And that process of writing to make a living to keep my job as an academic is why building furniture is interesting to me, because when I build
Mm.
that furniture there's an actual tangible product. There's like, oh, you did that, sis, because that writing situation is not that for me.
Yeah, well, I'll say, uh, people who follow my career as a cultural worker long enough, I started off as a photographer. Um, I thought it was a wonderful way to make money by on the side doing weddings, photo shoots for people, graduation photos, and then also do my more artsy stuff at the same time. And within a few years, 2, 3 years, I like, even to this day, I just don't even like photography anymore because it became I was very dependent on photography and then writing as a freelance writer and journalist. And honestly, I'm less passionate about both of those things because, in a way, when your livelihood is dependent on these things and you're no longer doing it from passion or revolutionary, practice, it really does rob you of your joy in something. Um, and then one of the ways that I've actually been able to kind of regain and readjust, I don't know the word, revamp my interest in these things is through organizing. Like I've been working since 2022, myself and Shaquille Fontenot and Joshua Parks. We're working on a documentary about Cuba and Black Cuban cultural work. And it has rebirthed my love of photography. It has re-engaged my love of writing. It's really given me back a lot of that. And so I think that when most young artists and cultural workers are when they first experience that kind of alienation, they're like, ugh, I'm losing passion in this thing. Your only thought is like, well, let me go and join this corporation. Let me go and try to get a commission from Levi's or something. And so I think all of us in the room got to do a better job at making sure cultural workers know they can join these organizations. They can join AAPRP, GC, they can join BAP and community movement builders, et cetera, et cetera. And that we will find a place for you to, if you play the saxophone, we're going to have you at the front of the march doing the thing. If you paint, we got banners that need to be painted and designed, um, it has to be seen as a really valid option that we can be validated outside of a Grammy or some shit. Like, we can actually find our validation in community shouldn't be a radical idea.
Absolutely. In fact, it's funny because one of the oldest members of APRPGC, he's in his 80s and he's a painter, and he has painted every African Liberation Day banner we've had for years, right? So yes, that is one of the ways that he constantly contributes. Okay, so then speaking about joy, I kind of want to ask a question that thinks about like spirit versus the material, right? So Sekou Touré, you kind of mentioned this earlier when you were referencing Cabral, but Sekou Touré, in this little packet right here, what is it? A dialectical approach to culture. He says that material cultural production and spiritual cultural production are dialectically linked. Or in other words, culture is both a material and a spiritual acquisition. But he warns us that the absolute priority must rest with material production. So I wanted you to maybe kind of respond to this line of thought and tell us a little bit more about the role of spirit in your work as a cultural worker.
Yeah, I think there is and this is actually something that a lot of specifically Marxist cultural analysis and anti-colonial cultural analysis speak to. There's like an emotional element that artwork can provide, and that uh, cultural modes of communication can convey that others just cannot, right? And so there's a reason why, for example, we can think of like Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddamn alongside a Black liberation movement. Or we think of Fela Kuti, and there's certain songs that we know were playing in the background of anti-colonial resistance, right? And so um, I think that what culture and artwork do across all cultures and all communities, since people love the communities word, is it provides an emotional element. And for some people that is spiritual. I'm a Muslim, but also like you can be in Cuba and there's like rumba, which is deeply, deeply, deeply connected to African spirituality. Um, so I don't think that it's always necessarily spiritual. Just because I think emotional connection is uh, uh, I don't want to say like a better application, but I think that's really what it is that at least there's like an emotional element that that is also birthed out of our like common experiences and our resistance. And so even when you think of the grip that gospel music had at one point in the civil rights movement, that we call it now civil rights movement, that in and of itself, a lot of those people were not Christian, right? Like, you hear these Christian spirituals or hymns being sung while they march, but you look and you see people who we know for a fact were Muslim, people who were atheist, people who were et cetera, Jewish, who were still marching and singing along and clapping their hands. And so I think it's very emotional is what art allows us to do. Even like I have one of my favorite artists is Emory Douglas, from the Black Panthers, and let me show you. Right, and so this is just like a collection. I'm not good with like the influencer, you got to do like the hand behind it or something. But right, and so Emory Douglas, there's a lot of iconic imagery that we associate with the Black Panthers, and a lot of it came from the mind of Emory Douglas, who was the Minister of Culture and Propaganda, and he talks about could I ask? See, I'm not used to the little YouTube things because I'd be ready to. Well, I put square quotes around civil rights because I think that's a limiting framework to think of that era. I think that era was, we could really call it Black liberation or something more accurate. I think civil rights is a very containing framework, especially because a lot of the struggle at that same exact time was also for like the right of self-defense, human rights, and sort of an international human rights struggle. So I think we call a certain era the civil rights movement that does not necessarily need to be contained to just that. But anyway, I'll stop there.
Um,
Or did you
did you
finish your point about Emory Douglas though?
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. So, um, something that Emory Douglas in undergrad, when I really discovered Emory Douglas's some interviews with him way, a few years ago, it was like he talks about propaganda. And I remember thinking like propaganda is this bad thing. Like propaganda is so that's when like evil governments send messages to people. Like we don't really actually have a functioning definition of propaganda in this country. And Emory Douglas talks about propaganda as neutral. Propaganda is like a method and a tool, and it depends on who's wielding it. It's before marketing, communications scholars will tell you marketing as a field, entire field, and PR used to be propaganda. Um, and so Emery talked about how like they were actually very conscious that they were creating propaganda. He was like, we wanted to create imagery that associated quickly and easily individuals with our politics, with our lines, with our campaigns. And I think they did that very successfully, specifically because they were so intentional. They were like, we're creating propaganda. We're trying to reach the hearts and minds of the masses. Um, and that's how I tend to view that line between cultural worker and artist. It's like, are you consciously engaging in political organization through your artistic practice and cultural production? Um, or are you an artist who happens to have some like consciousness within your artwork? And which is fine, but those are just two very different things.
Yeah, I mean, Tony K. Bombara says that the role of the artist is to make revolution irresistible, and so in that regard, that's what propaganda is supposed to do, right?
Yeah, so this is sort of a related question. Walter Rodney said, probably the only people who have succeeded in some measure in communicating what it means to be a colonial going to the metropole have been the novelists, because there is an emotive quality that must be conveyed by the artist, right? So, thinking with this, how does poetry? So you published a poetry book recently, right? And you've been a poet for a long time. How does poetry communicate the realities of the colonized in the domestic colony or settler colony?
Yes, and also shout out to Walter Rodney. Love Walter Rodney. Um, reading How Europe Underdeveloped Africa in 2014 taught me how to analyze culture from a materialist perspective. Walter Rodney single-handedly, I think, was the first. He speaks specifically about how in certain parts of West Africa, fabric making and iron smelting were present for hundreds of years before European arrival on the continent. And it was ingrained in their culture. Different fabrics meant different things. Certain fabrics were only made certain times of the year. Iron smelting, there were certain irons designs used for like nobility versus it. So he talks about how what colonialism did was it supplanted the local indigenous culture, right? So this practice of cloth making that all along the West African coast was very popular. uh, the Europeans, through imperialism, they supplanted that indigenous local cultural practice by essentially figuring out how to mass produce cheap knockoff cloth and then flooding the markets with those cheap knockoffs to the point where eventually the entire economy sort of begins to shift and the culture then begins to shift to where now there's these cheaply available consumables. And then decades to centuries later, the locals can no longer, they've forgotten how to even make the cloth in a lot of places. Iron smelting, Walter Rodney talks about, was completely lost in places like Benin, where it was actually some of the earliest in civilization. And so I will be honest, I don't remember your question or how I got on that part, but if
So
you
what
could
I
repeat
asked
it.
was like, how does poetry communicate the realities of the colonized in the domestic or settler colony?
That's right there. Yep. Uh, I think that to Rodney's point, poetry, along with novels and creative writing in general, um, it does what the humanities sciences are supposed to do, right? It's supposed to provide a language for the experiences, for the emotions that we commonly feel. Um, I think poetry specifically, there's a reason why it has been found in virtually all cultures across history and society, like poetry, whether it's, you know, a haiku or an epic or what a fable. Um, Poetry, as I think Audre Lorde really said it best when she said it's economical, right? Like I might be on the metro. I used to ride the metro every day when I lived in DC, and I might not have time to read a chapter in a book, but I do have time to read 2 or 3 poems. And perhaps those poems will put into perspective um, emotions, experiences, commonalities, and different things that I have felt but not have the language for. And so I think that is where poetry becomes very valuable, is it's able to provide language in unique ways um, where it might not yet exist. I think that we can also look at the material basis of poetry itself. Like I was speaking with someone recently, another poet actually, about Palestinian poetry and how here in the US we have this phenomenon of poets who just write about themselves, right? It is all about identity and reflecting on the self, this very Western existentialism type shit, but with like a black face on it half the time. And contrast that with like the Palestinians who are very intimately and deeply aware of the primary contradiction of their situation. And Palestinian poetry, 9 times out of 10, is about the land, martyrdom, resistance fighters, passing oral histories down, um, all of these different things. And so I think that's like a very clear example of how when poetry is really actually genuinely attached to the material conditions and a material basis, and that it doesn't even have to necessarily be literal per se, because poetry is very expansive. I think that's when it's the most powerful. I think that's why poetry has been very powerful throughout history, and it's also been a pretty integral part of organization. Um, when Amiri Baraka was arrested in the late 80s, it was actually Audre Lorde, and this is after they had feuded, by the way. The two of them, if you, I'm sure you two know, they briefly feuded around sexism and homophobia. Audre Lorde had issues with Amiri. Fast forward, Amiri Baraka gets arrested, and Audre Lorde organizes poets in the Poet Society to march for him and to do like a poetry show and raise money, you know, to get him released, and played a pretty big role in getting him released, to my understanding. And so, like, poetry does not have to just be like this narcissistic, artistic thing. Poetry actually can be a very practical mode of organizing both your own thoughts and collective experiences and thoughts, and to bring people into the room. And so, yeah, and then I'll just say, you know, when I wrote my first book, Grayish Black, I don't know, I published it in 2016. I wrote it between 2013 to 2015. Um, I did all the things that I'm critiquing right now. It was all about me. It was liberal and individualist in many places. It like I'm not speaking from the point of view like I woke up and decided I'm a cultural worker. It's like, no, I have actually experienced the other side of things. I've seen that there is a very almost like a fast track that you can hop on if you want to, but I had to learn through reading the people who I say that I actually look up to, right? Actually reading Tony K. Bambara, Alice Walker, Walter Rodney, Amiri Baraka, who, by the way, Amiri Baraka politically towards that last decade or so, you know. I just reread a Walter Rodney book that he submitted an essay in, and I was like, damn, I don't remember. Anyways, but um, let me not. But I think I think poetry, for all of those reasons, it's never going to go away. It's might be in different forms. We have new forms of poetry all the time. Um, to your point about spoken word, I am not. I hate when people call me a spoken. I don't read poems out loud. I told your man that I don't read poems out loud. Like I write poems to be read in your head. Like I'm not. I don't
So
do
I guess that
reading.
means you don't want to share any of your poetry with us today, huh?
I
Because
would
that
love
was
to. I would love to invite you to read whichever one stood out to you the most. Even when I
that's
the when I think I would love to be a spoken word poet, and maybe I'll read a poem just because you asked nicely. But I think in general, like there's different kinds of poems, and spoken word is a label that only gets put on black people for the most part, like you said. And there's certain conventions and practices in poetry and like poetry slams, like a certain cadence and way you talk and deliver. A lot of that stuff is very like, no, I ain't doing no live slam right now. No. A lot of that stuff is like very performative. Like you're performing for like Two Black actually talks about this and how he used to be very involved in the poetry scene in Minneapolis. And he's like, a lot of these people are literally just performing for white eyes, white dollars, white grants. Poetry also has its massive co-opted industry as well that is, in my opinion, not a side of struggle. Fuck that shit. But so anyways, yeah, poetry is economical.
so that actually wraps up our interview questions. And I was going to ask you if you would like to share a piece with us. If you are so inclined, we would love for you to do so, but also we will respect your desire not to have to read your poetry out loud if you don't want to.
You can just talk or just talk, and or talk about the book in general. You have a couple prefaces. You start with like a essay, like a more kind of explanatory note, and then you. So what? Yeah, you can just talk about any aspect of your book, which everybody should buy. I'm about to drop the link in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm over here scrolling trying to figure out if I'm gonna read one, but I think this book, I this go round, like the first time I did Grayish Black, I did a bunch of talks at schools. I got invited places, did some art shows. Um, this time around, I just was so uninterested in all that. I think there's a real way that we can have all these critiques of celebrity and then on the left still play into it. Um, and I just get very uncomfortable with that. I'm like, I'm good actually on that. The only celebrity I stand is like Walter Rodney. And so the book came out. I'm really excited for it. It is really, a lot of it is just personal reflections of being a quote unquote activist organizer from like 18 to 25 ish, and then stopping to reflect on how much you thought you knew and you don't. you know that's really genuinely what a lot of it is. It's and it was originally a much different book. It was actually like a love poem thing. And I, having left that relationship months before the book was supposed to come out, clearly changed gears a lot. But the thing about it is, when you read this, I say this in the introduction note, I deal with a lot of writer's block. As I share in the book, I have OCD, and I have had OCD for a while, but the symptoms themselves became more and more difficult in the last few years, and writing became very difficult. People who follow me on Patreon, I used to be able to publish multiple things a month. Now it's like lucky if I can do one thing a month. And despite that, poetry, I've always continued writing poetry no matter what, like almost every single day. And so for this book, I had about 700 poems that I wrote in a 2 or 3 year period. Um, and these are the ones that for this book specifically, and these are the ones that made the cut. Um, I will say something I hope listeners take to heart. All of my portion of the proceeds for this book will be split between the Jericho movement for political prisoners and the Sami Dune Palestinian political prisoner network. Um, I have a day job, you know. Oh, I love to see a patron in the comments, you know. I'd be struggling over there. You know, yeah, and I'll just say it's a really personal project. The whole second half of the book is a little bit more introspective, and then the first half is the more political, you know, side of things. But Mohammed El Kurd wrote the opening note. He's a Palestinian poet, a friend of mine, and like it didn't feel like the book was very important. I was kind of just ready to get it over with because after 4 years, 3 or 4 years of waiting on something to come out, kind of right. But then I read what he wrote in the introduction. And I think I'm just curious. Oh,
You cut out for a second. You said Muhammad Al Kurd wrote the preface, so pick up from there. You're back now.
oh yeah. Um, you know, I when I sent the book to Erica and Salifu and Mohammed for them to write their opening introductory notes and prefaces, um, I was kind of nervous. I was like, a lot of the things in these poems are relatively controversial arguments that we have had in WhatsApp and our phone calls when we're kikiing, you know, we're talking shit about the anarchist or whoever is the target that day. A lot of that is what's in the book. And I think that I have gotten a response from some people who, you know, Nikki says, I bust shots, don't duck unless the shoe fit. And I think for some people, the shoe fit. And people got a little upset with me, and we had a phone call, and it is what it is. But yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
So do you okay, so is that a pass on reading? Or
Okay.
if you don't want to, okay. Or and also you can direct our audience to maybe a book or two.
Particular poem. Yeah.
No, I'm a read a poem. I'm trying to let me find it right now. I got two that I yes, always the Nikki. What? You crazy. I'm gonna I wouldn't be a poet if it wasn't for hip hop, first off. Let me say that. Yeah, like I genuinely made a conscious decision. I will never forget me and my friend, freshman year of college. We both dropped out not so long after, but we were both sitting there and I love to rap. Like I genuinely love to rap. I love to freestyle. And my friend and me were rapping and we were killing it. But we said to each other, we do not need no more light skinned rappers. We do not need no more, like, we just stick to poetry. And so a lot of people are lucky that I did make the conscious choice to choose poetry instead of a diss track every weekend, because I would be on high Kendrick Lamar energy. Um, so with that, um, the first poem I'm gonna read is called "I Can Almost Remember." Um, It's on page 49. The book is also available free ebook. Everyone, if you don't want to buy it, there's a free ebook available on the website. I wrote this poem because, you know, I grew up in Georgia here in the South, and there used to be a time when we could find fresh fruit stands off of every exit on every corner. Especially my favorite was always hot boiled peanuts. Um, and due to capitalism, we no longer have that. And so that's what this poem is about. I can almost remember that sing-song taste, a salty slow draw across my tongue, always landing on a perfect little sweet spot. Shabby 2x4s with deep copper-rusted nails, holding sunbathing watermelons, dark pecans, tomatoes and apples, peaches too if we was lucky, all existing to be praised by youth, a roadside divinity. That battered strand board stained with thick letters slowly scribbled across with permanent marker. Good God, get them bad boys from the spoon to that styrofoam cup, cloth, and brown bag. Get them goobas to the nearest register. Grab a few of them Georgia peaches too. Weigh it up, cash only, smiles appreciated, tips even better. Wet hot pot of shell sucking spicy goodness, sitting in my lap, that gush of Congo's gooba. Between my teeth, a rush of Carver's legacy, hidden all the spots, smacking loud and then hushed. Joyful good stuff, Gullah godsend sold by the pound, paid in quarters and crumpled dollars, devoured. You ain't eating them right, babe. You gotta pop that whole thing in your mouth just like this. He watches hungry eyes examine the cup, finding the best one. Natural instinct plucking it from the spice bath into my mouth with the skill of a southern assassin. Put it right there and bite, not too hard, but just enough to break that outer shell. Just enough to slurp the juices out and to get to the meat. No worries about the mess, just slurp. Swollen laughter underneath a noisy Georgia sky reminds me. Time and distance and my own neglect stole these from me. He asks, why don't we really see these around anymore? How does a little hot boiled peanut compete with capitalism? So that was that.
And you took me right there because I can see myself eating.
Well, so I don't know if you know. I think Sharice knows. I love George Washington Carver a lot, and I before the pandemic was planning on doing academic research about him, and then the archives closed at Tuskegee. Anyways, the gooba, as we call goober, this is a Congolese word, and there's actually a certain breed of peanuts in South Carolina that comes directly from the Congo, from enslaved Africans, and the fact that it makes it all the way into Black people's cup on a roadside fruit stand, I think is very beautiful. So I have one more that I'm a read because this is my favorite one in the whole entire book, actually. And I really can't believe I'm reading this out loud, but whatever. It's called When They Get Me. And I originally wrote this on a note in my phone and screenshotted it and sent it to Salifu. So if Salifu's listening, shout out to you.
What page?
Oh, 55, page 55. Yes, I feel like the dude from Reading Rainbow, like we're reading along right now. It's let me stop. All right. Will I be unloading bags from my car, picking up the heavy ones for my partner, laughter and music still spilling from open doors when they get me? Will I leave blood stains on the floor of a mosque or watch the guards laugh as I beg for my inhaler? Where will it happen? Somewhere they knew I would be, somewhere I knew that they would be, somewhere I knew not to fear, maybe somewhere I trusted too much. Would it be a bomb hidden in my mailbox? A rush into my home, my job? Will it be when I let my guard down, hit the blunt with my sisters, and bike across the city as if the world briefly doesn't hate us? Will I know it's coming? Will I feel it, or will instinct fail me? Will my mother be okay? Will she get an insurance check? Will they mail her my bloody clothes like they did Pat Rodney? Are others at risk, and could it spread? If they try but fail, what next? Will I be 40 years incognito in Camagüey with my guard down when they get me? Will I reach 40? Or maybe I will be on the front lines under the heat of summer clashes in a blaze of black bloody glory. The kids who drink spoonfuls of revolution will speak of for generations to come, right? Will they catch me on the run? Will they get me in hiding? Will they find me in the safe house surrounded by steel, gunpowder, burner phones, 100 copies of that pesky little red book, and about a dozen revolutionaries who didn't know when to give up? Will they drop a drone on us smack dab in the middle of the same hood that raised me? What will they tell the media to tell the people to turn them against me? Will they say I stockpiled weapons, or will they say I had real bad ideas? Will they get me all alone, wasting away in a prison cell, eaten alive by bed bugs and state-sponsored shanks? How will they justify it? Will they even need to if they've already got me? Hey, will I be able to get a few of them first?
Ow.
Oh.
We got snap, 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 burns incense, butterfly in the sky. Now
Now I'm
this
gonna go.
I really
I'm gonna
appreciate
go.
no, this is a great poem, especially the eating alive by bed bugs. That was old dude in Fulton County jail, right?
Yep, yep. So this is like what I meant earlier when I was saying a shift from just introspection and identity and like my existence is resistance kind of thinking of poetry and just towards like collective poems that perhaps we've all experienced a similar kind of paranoia about like will they get me? Where will they get me?
Mm-hmm.
You
Do
know?
you remember when Sandra Bland was killed and there was like if I die in police custody, and there was like all of these like if I die in police custody, like people basically having that kind of refrain, like because at that time there was still like all this debate over the argument about her committing suicide or not. And even in my and that was around the time I finished my dissertation, so I actually have a whole a part of my chapter in my dissertation that which is about those if I die, all those kind of like refrains at that moment. So no, I really appreciate that. And I really enjoy poetry, but I don't feel like I have a now this word is now tainted, but I don't really feel like I have a very creative bone in my body, but I really enjoy it.
No.
I actually love slam poetry a lot. I like to go see it, but I appreciate you for sharing that with us today.
Let me
Ooh,
say
that voice
this.
makes me so uncomfortable. That's so funny. Like I do not. I can't do it.
Wait, what? You can't do what? I'm confused.
Slam poetry. It's just some of
Yeah.
the topics. Just it just make and emotion makes me uncomfortable, y'all. Like when people emote a lot, I'm just like, oh my god.
Nostalgic
Yeah.
because I
I,
really
I
found
oh,
community with other like I'm not a poet or whatever, but I really found community with that. Like and like I was living in DC for a while, and so I used to go to this spot on U Street that had like an underground like open mic night, or like the Southern Fried Poetry Slam was in North Carolina one year, and I remember doing like judging. So, and
mhm.
I'm not uncomfortable with people's emotions, but I actually really enjoy it. But sorry, I interrupted you, Lisa.
No, no, that's okay. I think I know some of the people who used to put on the Southern Fried Poetry Slam.
Well, that's where I met Tank from Tank and the Bangers. Like
Oh,
she was
okay.
doing poetry with Noya with the what is it, Slam Noya or Noya Slam? I can't remember what it was.
Yeah.
New Orleans Slam poetry team.
Yeah, it's a small world. I have a friend who was one of the songwriters for Tank and the Bangas, who lives near me. But I shit on spoken word poets a lot, but as like a joke. Like I think there is a real skill to reading your poem out loud and reciting it, especially from memory, like some poets do. I think
Mhm.
that I don't want to like diminish that at all. I do want to diminish the industry around all of
Yeah.
that. The reason why someone like Amanda Gorman, poet laureate, speaks at the inauguration, this very pro-imperialist, pro-capitalist, pro-assimilation poem and gets praise is because there's a whole industry of poetry that is so far removed from the masses. Like that's a whole, separate thing, a separate issue. So I do just want to say, like, I'm not trying to unjustly shit on. But I will say too, I think if there was an international law to ban mulattoes from spoken word poetry, I would if they were like all mixed people, you gotta mixed Africans, you no longer allow poetry. I would put down my pen and say, you know what, for the greater good. Because I think sometimes it is just a vessel for the most worst, corniest, liberal, stupid stuff possible. But
I can't abide that because the best poet that I know is is mixed race, and I think that the poetry world would sustain a huge loss if that ban were implemented.
I
So
agree. I
if
agree.
he's exempted, then okay.
I
Somebody
agree.
can volunteer as tribute.
Oh,
Well, I'm gonna have to go in a few minutes, but I wanted to.
Mhm.
I shared a link with you all. One of the things that we're doing with BAP Atlanta right now is we have this event of sorts called Atlanta to Gaza Globalize the Cultural Intifada. And we're basically having a community art show on July 7th. But the idea is that all June leading up to that art show, we're actually teaching these cultural workers skills to the community. So there's a session on how to make reinforced banners, how to do guerrilla art and tagging, printmaking. And so myself and some other comrades, on the 9th, we're actually going to be doing a radical poetry and zine making workshop, and art build. And so it's not just enough to talk about art, to talk about culture, to make poetry books, but also really trying to get into the community and nurture these skills, because y'all, our people are really losing, are being underdeveloped, right? And culturally underdeveloped, especially as more and more and more of our youth specifically are like wanting to be influencers and YouTubers and content creators. We as cultural workers, I'm going to include y'all too as cultural workers too, because y'all don't see yourselves like that, but it's absolutely part of what you do right here on this podcast, and in your writing. um, we have to we have to remind people, and we have to have a coordinated, organized, politically organized, um, really politically organized approach to reinvigorating culture among our youth specifically, and for them to stop thinking that culture is some, McDonald's sponsored deal that a streamer does with McDonald's. Like, they need to know that culture is a total way of life and it's a vehicle for our liberation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a very strong and powerful note to wrap up on. So we really appreciate you for your time today, for stepping out of yourself, your comfort zone, to share and read with us. And I feel like, that's a charge to all of us to really understand, the importance of this type of work, and also to think even more about how we incorporate it in our organizing work and our daily practices. So we thank you for that reminder.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I just said thank
Yeah, thanks both of y'all for having me. It's been a pleasure. Um, Folks, go buy the book. Again, the proceeds go to the Sammy Dune Palestinian Prisoner Network and the Jericho Political Prisoner Movement. I have an interview with someone from Sammy Dune that talks on groundings, that talks about the work that they do. And I'm interviewing Jihad Abdul Mumit soon, who will talk about his work with the Jericho movement if you need more information. Um, Other than that, bye, y'all.
you. Bye. Thank
Thank you.
you.
All right,
Oh,
y'all. So we're gonna wrap it up pretty quickly. The only thing we're gonna do before we wrap up is report on our reading challenge. And I'm just gonna go first because I finally finished this damn book. I'm very happy that I finally finished Greater Than the Sum of Our Parts. I will say I really, really, really like this book. I really appreciate it. And in a lot of ways, I actually think it's a so I've often told Sharice this. I don't really feel like I've read a lot of things that like change the way I think about things, or even like a lot of people will say when you write, like you want to find models to write like or write towards or write with. And I've not really felt that way about a lot of things, but I feel that way about this book. And the reason why I think I feel that way about this book is that it I don't think it's like basic in any way, but I also don't think it's like super dense in a way that makes it difficult to read. But what I really appreciate about it is, as much as I think it's important to be discerning and specific and precise about phenomena that we're describing, I really am moved by the work that we do to show the connectedness and the way all of these the way that a lot of the things that we experience are very actually similar. And so the work that she does, I think, to bring in Palestinian organizing, African diasporic organizing, and indigenous organizing together in conversation with both concrete examples and kind of some manifesto like things. I really actually appreciate that about this book because, and also even in terms of the way that this particular author engages feminism, I appreciate, because it's not particular kind of liberal feminism, it's not even that the book is explicitly focused on women the entire time, but or even just queer people, but there's a way that she engages what she's calling a feminist ethic and understanding like the gendered nature of the particular kind of oppression that Palestinian women are facing because of ideas about, you know, Palestinian contagion on the behalf of the Israeli state, the connections that are made between there. I will say this is the book. The author is Nada Aliyah. I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but that's the author there. But I really appreciate this book. I definitely recommend it. Yeah. And so what I will say is that I also, instead of the Struggle Continues pamphlet, even though I am reading that, I actually went back to this text, this Three Revolutionary Pan-African Women in his life during the Conakry years, which Kwame Nkrumah, which is by Doretha Drummond Mbalia. I had read a chapter of this book before for something that I was working on, but I wanted to finish it. So I'm about halfway through this. So I'll report on this next week. And then I was inspired by Musa coming on this week. And also it was mentioned in the Greater Than the Sum of Our Parts book, but I'm going to read this Born Palestinian, Born Black, and the Gaza Suite. It's a book of poetry. So that is my reading challenge for the week coming up.
So I listened to Black Feminism Reimagined After Intersectionality by Jen Nash on Audible, which I had read a couple chapters previously just because she came a while ago to Carlton and I actually just like her. But I listened to the book while I got back in the gym, y'all. So I was listening to it when I was doing my workout. So it actually was really interesting. I appreciated the critique that she had of intersectionality and through a critique of like Black feminist defensiveness, that like because Black feminists claim a propriety over intersectionality, it stifles other creativity and other harnessing of Black feminism for other types of political and affective projects. I just actually took some notes. So at some point I'm going to write this book about, probably a little book about triple oppression and exploitation, jeopardy and intersectionality. And so I was jotting down some notes, some things I want to think about for that text. You guys are on my helmet today. I am listening. I am looking out the window. So I'm in front of I'm looking out the window, but I am listening. Sometimes I'm also reading the sheet and preparing, like if I'm asking the next question or like listening. So I'm sometimes doing multiple things, but I am listening as well as thinking about what I'm going to say. So thank you, Mimi. Anyways, so I also am halfway through the book Black Liberation and Palestine Solidarity by Lenny Brenner and Matthew Quest, which so far it's okay. I didn't love the piece by Lenny Brenner. It was like about the civil rights movement and Zionism. The historical rendering was just a little bit strange, but the couple of essays that I've read so far by Matthew Quest are okay. So I'm gonna finish that. And then this week I'm choosing between two books: The Inter/Nationalism, Decolonizing Native America and Palestine by Stephen Salaita, or From Class to Race, Essays in White Marxism and Black Radicalism by Charles W. Mills. So those are the books that I'm thinking about. So yeah, what I will say is that even when I don't finish books personally, I feel like I'm reading more and reading specifically books. I read all the time, but reading books from cover to cover. So I appreciate the challenge for that, but I'm gonna really try to finish stuff. Although I did finish the Audible book and that counts to me, but I'm gonna really try to finish the book a week and stick to the challenge. So hopefully y'all are reading, and I think only one person dropped their book in the chat. Cool, Ocelot. Hopefully y'all are reading and enjoying. Oh, Eric Buckley started Black Liberation in Palestine.
That Stephen Salaita book, not the book that I read, the the Greater Than Some Our Parts, she says that book was really influential in her writing of this book, actually.
Still reading Walter Rodney. Yeah, I mean, I think. Sorry, that time I wasn't listening because I was putting things on. What did you say, Layla?
Nada Aaliyah, I don't know how to pronounce her name, but she said that Stephen Salida book was really influential in her writing this particular book. So.
Yeah. Musa about to reread History of the Upper Guinea Coast. I need to finish Prophet of Discontent. What's Prophets of Discontent? That sounds familiar. Why does that sound familiar? Sylvia Winter's Essay 1492, which is basically like a mini book on Two Blacks book, courtesy of Geechee. Somebody had MLK book. Oh, about MLK, exactly. Yes, Prophets of Discontent. Librarian finished James in Pursuit of Revolutionary Love. That's Joy James. Somebody asked, how do you manage to read so much so consistently? I feel like I don't read that much. Layla says I do, but I feel like I don't know. But I think it's just a function of being an academic, maybe. You you get into like the rhythm of reading. I don't know. Layla, how do you read so much so consistently?
I don't believe I read consistently. I like my reading is like my writing. Like I literally have sometimes I will read for an entire day. And then in terms of a book, right? Like, because I do think I think Onye said this, like they're in the same way that we have these like ways of engaging in a writing practice every day, in terms of smaller things. I obviously am reading smaller things all the time. Like I'm reading articles, like when I say articles, I mean like news articles, not like academic articles. But apart from those, like, I don't know, like I just realized that I'm very moody. Like I'm very emotional. And so like I've been reading a lot more lately because it's been nice outside and I've been sitting out on my back patio and I just be chilling. Like sometimes I might have a glass of wine, sometimes I might have nothing, but I just sit out there and read. And then sometimes it depends on what it is. Like when I really get into a thing, I don't want to put it down. But then there are other things that are really hard to read that I'm like, oh, let me get through this. So I don't know that I am a good person to model anyone's self off in terms of consistency, because I think I struggle with consistency.
I will say that one thing that has helped me recently is not trying, although I do want to read every day, theoretically, I think having a different metric has been helpful. So like the week container makes me read more, I think. I don't know. So maybe having a different metric might help with consistency. And so sometimes it's like 15 minutes every day or like whatever, a certain amount. Like now we're trying to read a book a week and that's been really helpful. And it's also helped gauge, right? And it also helps gauge like how fast or how much I can actually have the capacity to read. But I do think that it fluctuates, but it's also like, I do love reading. So I'm not somebody that's ever had a problematic relationship with reading, which is different than a lot of people. And I think that makes consistent reading undesirable or really difficult. And so I actually do love reading, which is why it's so strange that I don't read way more than I do. I'd be catting off a lot. So, but
I think that has more to do with just all of the things that we expect of ourselves versus what's actually happening. So you're probably comparing yourself to another point in time in your life, but you still do read a lot.
I do. And I read to my baby every day. So I'm at least reading one children's book.
You're probably reading that anti-racist baby.
I gotta read her godmother's gift to her. You feel me?
I'm so tired of you.
All right.
Anyway, y'all look, we're getting close to LDI days with these 2-hour plus episodes.
We are. Oh, listen, I'm not gonna lie. Today was a struggle. And this is the thing about vulnerability. You tell people you're doing things like settle your Carls and everybody want to be on your help. But it's cool. But I will block people. So let me just say that too. Like we can have a difference of opinion, all those things. But if you're just being rude and disrespectful, like you're not entitled to this space. We cultivated for community, for comrades, and to do the things that we to talk about the things we care about, and for us also to build something together. But like, you're not entitled to this space, and so be cool.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between asking questions or even challenging ideas versus ad hominem attacks. And I think that we have to really engage more principally with one another, because that is not what the chat is for. So,
and blocking is part of settling your quarrels, because it is a means of me not cussing the motherfucker out. So be cool. Just be cool.
Elon, sure, you can either message me directly on any of my social media, or you can send the email to the LSR box. We both get those, so for sure.
Librarian. Right. Shout out to Goddess Crew. I saw you.
Yes.
In the chat. I appreciate that, man. Because I know, like, if somebody was coming for Layla or something, I would do the same thing. But yeah, just be cool, like, for real, because also it does have an effect on other people in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Who is lying? I don't know what you talk about. Ain't nobody lying about anything. Also, all of this stuff is a process. Like, I don't. Again.
What are you responding to in terms of lying? Oh.
Yeah, and this is the person I talk about. I don't be paying attention. Like, like, you can also keep that to yourself.
But also the paying attention thing, I think, is we all have different ways that we receive information. I remember y'all used to joke about me looking up at the ceiling all the time, because I do. Like, that's one of my thinking faces. So I don't know why we want to project what anybody is thinking or feeling based on how they look, because we don't know.
And running a podcast is many things. We are talking, we are preparing the next thing. I was pulling up links, dropping things. Like, Musa has sent links. So I'm trying to put things in the chat. So, like, it's just absolutely not it's just absolutely not.
I would say it's not in good faith. It's not in good faith in terms of what it is that we are attempting to do here. And I don't think this is the place for it.
Yeah. So, and again, like, you got a couple times and you will be blocked. And even if you keep coming back with different names, all of them will be blocked. So just be cool, right? There's a difference, again, like as Layla said, there's a difference between having a difference of political opinion, whatever. Even if you disagree, there's a way to do that without being antagonistic. So be cool.
What are you talking about, Leah? I hope you don't think that was my point. I'm not. I definitely wasn't responding to you. So I don't know what you're talking about. No, we're good over here.
Yeah, a bunch of new usernames of each chat. I've been talking reckless in the past week, so must be going around. Y'all, it's settle your quarrels. Settle your quarrels. Be cool. Treat each other well. And if you interpret me being antagonistic by offering a political opinion you disagree with, fine. But this is not the space for that. So anyways, enough about that.
There's a lot of stuff in the chat right now. They're talking about a bunch of different things.
We're like, and my hyper vigilance is kicked in again. There's been a few things that I read that I was like, what?
I know. And that's other thing, y'all. Sharice and I are also communicating with each other, trying to keep the show going as things are happening. And so, like, those of you who've done this, you know what it's like. But if you've not done this, moving between the show and trying to make sure you're looking, but also the master document that we have, the chats, and trying to drop links, it's just a lot. Like, it's a lot to manage. And I will say that this is one of the things I employ in my class. And one of the reasons why I make my students lead a class is because it's easy to talk junk about a thing from outside or from not having to do that.
Oh no, I blocked the wrong
person. I'm gonna say you did the wrong person.
Oh, let's see. Oh God. I am so sorry, Melcher, Asles. I don't know how to, maybe there's a setting. Sorry about that, but Mimi, I think that this is the same person. Goodbye. Okay, so I'm gonna I think that there's probably settings where I can go back and unblock that person. My bad. I feel terrible.
No.
Those who Melcher Asles is, tell them I'm so sorry and I am working to fix the problem. I think I can go and I think you can there's probably some settings where I can fix it. But anyway, yeah, I meant to block Mimi. See y'all, listen. Mimi was trolling real, yes. And this is the thing, is like nobody ever interacts with you like this in person. And that's my whole thing about the internet, because y'all, like, nobody interacts with you like this in person, and I just would love to. Anyway, so, but I'm settling my quarrels, y'all. I am, but admittedly I was a little bit flustered today. I will continue to be so if people are like talking shit, because it ignites like my hypervigilance, and my immediate mode is to clap back, and I again am trying to not do that. But anyways, thank you for but it's, and that's the thing. It's like the other bad thing about it is like should be overwhelmingly supportive and kind and all those other things, but we then harp in on like the couple negative things. So I don't want to do that either. So thank y'all for real.
Yes, thank everybody for your engagement and participation as always. And yeah, we have to deal with the haters as they come.
I'm gonna go fix Melcher Asles right away. So okay. Goddess said that
you could fix it, but I don't know.
That I can fix it. Oh, Layla, what about the African Luciferin Project?
That was the unbreakable heritage that I was mentioning. So it was, I mentioned at the beginning of the show, there's a woman named Andradina Cardoso, who I believe was the highest ranking Black woman in the Socialist Party of Portugal. But there was something that happened recently, and there's an issue, but this is a project that she's working on now that she's recently invited me to collaborate on. So I don't have too much information to share at the moment, but there is actually a conference coming up in Lisbon on June 3rd that is also going to feature the work of, what is that man's name? David Montero, actually, which is about the stolen wealth of slavery. I think I mentioned that book some months ago or whatever. But yeah, so as I have more information on that, I am happy to share that.
All right, y'all. Well, thanks again. Hold on. Sorry, Goddess. Yeah, whatever Google account this is has a list of blocked users that you can find in your privacy settings.
Okay.
Maybe I got to do it through YouTube and not StreamYard. All right, y'all. Let's hop up off this thing because we just rambling at this point. Yes. We want to edit this whole part out because, like, although no, because you were talking about your project. Whatever. Yeah. Y'all just know.
This is what comes with doing it live. So we knew that, changing the format would change engagement, and it is what it is.
And doing more audience kind of participation, talking with that type of thing. So, but we take the good with the bad. Librarian, you could have 3 extra posts. Okay, you could like 4. Thank you for writing. All right, y'all.
Take care. Peace.